The story begins with the protagonist elaborating on what he learned for the 20 years in his life, and the more he thought of it, he realized that the world really didn't need him at all until he fell. Meanwhile, near the border of Datra, it seems that a guy is escaping from some kind of goons with a girl, and the guy stops holding her hand, realizing that she isn't that comfortable with guys. Even though she begins to apologize to him, he feels like it must be a tradition for her people, and he couldn't help but wonder how long it took for him to realize that the girl named Karsha would even let him hold her hand. Karsha seems to be thinking about her sister through this whole time, and they think of getting near the shrine of Naraka as soon as possible. The commander of the goons seems rather disgusted to feel like his people are taking this much time to find them, and he is not amused about it at all. The monster-like people in the clan claim that they are almost unable to sense anything with their noses because of the overwhelming trash everywhere in the city. But one of them feels like they must have been heading toward the shrine as they have nowhere else to run to for now. Even though they wonder that the shrine must have been abandoned for a long time, the guy adds that the place still has a hole open in there for them to use, meaning that the Adarl will be able to produce ambrosia. When they think of speculating through the possibilities, he assumes that tonight will be an eclipse for them to think of. Then when the duo gets to the shrine, he feels like the shrine looks worse than it used to look, and even though they were supposed to get some kind of protection as the children of the gods, as the father had them give up their protection and turn to science in its place, the chance of getting help is almost none, but they assume that it must have been the right thing to do. Karsha claims that the moons are in position and the eclipse is about to start soon, meaning that they can do what they initially wanted to do in the first place. As she reveals the horn of one of their ancestors, it seems to be the last of the Rakshasa's sacred treasures, which will be used in the ritual they are about to perform. But the guy thinks that it is too bad as he is nothing but a half-elf. If it wasn't like this for him, he could have just taken her Dharani himself, which makes her shriek as she feels like he is being unreal in this situation. Then when he begins to ask her if she wants to have it for someone else, she feels rather shy and starts hiding her face, adding that it is some kind of sacred secret for her. At this moment, the guy feels like the goons have caught their scent, and he assumes that he will be fine and readies his weapon to protect her in the meantime. When he is busy protecting her, Karsha begins to perform the ritual, and the guy keeps himself performing the execution on the goons, chasing them down as much as he can to protect the sister. But the more he gets through each of them, the goons begin to shoot at him, and he feels like there are too many for him to even handle. Then when Karsha finally summons the guest she has been performing the ritual for, the light spreading from the ritual stance begins to pierce through the skies, and a human comes out of nowhere on the platform, which gives her a bit of hope. Then when he finally wakes up, he notices that the girl in front of him is rather cute, and she even has the horns on her head, and the girl introduces herself as Sakura and asks him to lend his strength to her. Sakura starts calling him that he must be the knight armed with a saber of light, and the protagonist tries his best to make her understand that the thing in his hand is not some kind of weapon, and he himself is unable to understand what is even happening. Then when he feels like he is unable to understand what he should do right now, and keeps searching for the answers to the questions from Sakura, the guy comes in to let them know about the danger, and some goons come along with him inside the shrine to attack them. Even though Sakura thought that the summoned visitor had to be some kind of knight, she realizes that the protagonist is rather pathetic, and he begins to feel the urge to escape from this place. As the same guy ends up protecting them once again, the dead body of the goon falls on the ground, and the protagonist is unable to believe that he is lying down on the ground with a dead body right now. Even though Sakura feels like she has a lot of questions to ask him, the guy ushers her, adding that they have to run as soon as possible as the people have been chasing them down. They end up taking the protagonist in some place, which makes him able to understand that they are not surely in his own world, and when Sakura is about to fall down on the ground, she refuses to touch his hand no matter what. Then when the protagonist feels rather betrayed and ashamed of his actions, she tries her best to make him understand that she doesn't hate him, and their protector wonders what is even happening. As the protagonist is unable to grasp what is happening, the protector claims that Sakura is the princess of Adarl, but as her country was attacked, she is the only survivor remaining in this place. Because of that, they were trying their best to summon a human to help them out, as humans are rather rare in this counterpart of the world. They had to do it anyway. Knowing that Sakura will need to use someone humane to use her powers, The protector asks her to use the powers with him if possible, and she feels like there might be no use to do so as he has been fleeing from battle, and he even looks rather weak, so there is no way she would like to rely on someone like him, and adds that it must be her fault to summon him in this world to get him into trouble, so they will be trying to keep him safe as much as they can. But the fact that the protagonist is useless even in the new world keeps making him feel like he is about to lose his mind, and when he claims that he is sorry, Sakura feels like it must have been her own mistake as he didn't do anything wrong. Just when she begins to apologize to him, the goons and the leader of the goons come back at once to meet them face to face, and the tattoo on the goon makes the protector realize that he must have been from Hasa's, the one who has been hunting down Adarl. As the leader realizes that she is the one holding the ambrosia, he orders his ogre army to deal with the protector. The leader commands Sarka to worry about herself and claims that only if she decides to swear that she will offer the power of the ambrosia to Hasa's, he will be the one to spare her life in the first place. But Sarka claims that as she swore on the bodies of her parents that she would end up restoring her country by using the ambrosia, there is no way she would act like the traitor by teaming up with Hasa's. Then as she claims that she would be ready to die to stand where she is standing, the protagonist begins to feel the bravery striking through her mind. Just when the leader starts pushing through his knife to hurt her, the protagonist comes in the middle of them to act like the vanguard of the princess, and when he falls down, the protector begins to attack the leader to keep the princess safe. When the protagonist is asked about his sacrifice, he claims that she just looked cute to him, and the more she thinks about him, she thinks that he must be rather idiotic as she has been saying only nasty things about him. But the only thing that keeps making the protagonist feel regretful is that he has always been useless, so he thinks of being useful to her even once. Just as he loses his breathing formation, she slides her hand into his wound to make him realize that he is not about to die that easily, as he will have to devote his life to her in the first place. Just when she begins to lick his blood, she asks if he will be the one to fulfill her desires and demands an answer from him, adding if he is the one to accept the divinity within her melons and the curse while she keeps on unveiling through her clothing. But the more he thinks that if it keeps her alive, he will do anything he can to make it happen, and she lets him taste the nectar of her melons, you know. As soon as the protagonist gets the taste of the nectar, Sarka begins to shriek while looking into the sky, and she feels the powerful urge inside of her, and the protagonist ends up rising as his eyes feel like it is about to gush a load of power to obliterate his enemies. In this situation, the protector feels like it must be the power of the Durrani, and the protagonist is allowed to display his divine might as the cursed twisted servant that she has been desiring from the beginning. Now that the protagonist looks back, he reminds himself that he was ready to die for Sarka, and when she thought of regretting living the life he has been doing, ambrosia ended up changing his life. The dazzling view of the naked melons on the princess gave him the urge to live for himself once again, and he almost lost himself in the urge to taste even more, and he started sucking it out of her. Now that the protagonist is holding the lost power of the gods in his own body, the Durrani rises and Sarka commands the protagonist to strike all of her enemies down at once, and the power begins to rush through him to take them down one by one as he keeps flashing through the enemies. Now as the goon leader looks into the protagonist, he feels like it must be the Durrani of Indra as he is now able to fight while clad in lightning, and Sarka feels like he must be the rightful servant that she has been looking for this whole time. As her split personality Sarka begins to show, the protector is unable to realize why she has been changing course through her behavior, and she commands him to call her Shakuntala as the protagonist keeps on bashing his blasts against the enemies. The commanders and army of the Dala claim that they have the strongest weapons in the world, so they have to keep going against the power of Durrani, as they have been researching modern weapons for a long time. As soon as the Gatling gun is revealed, he is unable to understand what is about to happen, and the commander claims that the gun is able to fire 40 rounds in barely 10 seconds, so there is no way the protagonist will be able to survive against modern weaponism. But after blocking the firepower at once with his bare hands, the protagonist charges against the enemies who have been using the gun to make it uncontrollable for them to touch. Then when the protagonist falls down on the ground after bashing on the gun, an army of ogres start bashing on him at once to finish him off at once, only to realize that the protagonist is not about to hold back no matter how many ways they think of dealing with him. When the protector feels like his mind has completely gone insane, Sakura confirms that it must be the case this time around as he himself is unable to control his urges and feelings to defeat the enemies. Just when the protagonist charges against the commander of the enemies, the goon's leader comes in the middle to deflect the attack made by him, as he has been holding the orichalcum blade in his hands, which is supposed to be more than a match for him. When the body of the protagonist begins to burn away like he has been touched by the holy fire, the protector decides to chip in the middle to protect the protagonist before he vanishes away in the air. Then, as the goon leader keeps on charging against the protector, the commander asks Gil-Garla to fall back, as he was only supposed to be here to protect him, and nothing else, as he has to obey his orders till the end. After listening to his boss, Garla thinks that it will be better to settle the score another day, and begins to run away, adding that he will come back once again, adding that Ambrosia and Durrani both belong to Hassas, and he will end up taking them away no matter what till the end. Then, after the enemies leave, the protagonist falls down on the ground, turning himself into his regular version of his human self, and after being rescued, he wakes up in a secluded place to realize that he is not dead yet. As soon as he regains his consciousness and looks at the broken ship that he is in, he remembers what has happened to him the last night, as someone has certainly attempted to kill him, but now the wounds are all gone from his body. Then, when he begins to wander around the place, he hears that someone is singing somewhere along the line, only for him to find out that it is Sarka who has been singing while bathing on her own in the fountains. As soon as she notices that he has been looking at her for quite some time, she ends up throwing a stone in his face, and it ends up bursting his head. She claims that there is no way she would feel like he was about to get hurt. Then, as she begins to treat him to betterment while being naked, the protagonist insists that he will be fine, and he claims that he can still see her naked, which makes her run away from him. Then, as they both sit while keeping a huge stone in the middle between them, Sarka thanks him wholeheartedly for saving her yesterday, and she begins to explain that he might have tasted her melons. At this time, the protagonist claims that it is the truth, and when he mentions that she must have acted rather differently at that time, she explains that it was not really her, but her split personality acting up, and when it happens, she doesn't really remember what happens. She apologizes to him, adding that she is the only reason why he has been suffering right now, and the protagonist feels like he has lost some of his memory from the previous day. After realizing that he is unable to remember anything, she claims that he had done well after gaining the powers of Durrani, and the protagonist feels better than ever knowing that he managed to help her out in his own way after acting useless his whole life until now. Now she claims that for that sole reason, he is about to be targeted by Dalla, but he is happy that he happened to taste her, which is his biggest achievement. Now that he revealed his passion, she thinks that she thought of him to be someone great, but now she feels like he is nothing more than a simple pervert. At that moment, the protector comes back, adding that he ended up catching a lot of fish for them, and he claims that after hearing that Datra was filled with fish, he is now seeing it in action. Then, when the protagonist begins to wonder about the stuff that he has been carrying, the protector claims that his clothes were unable to recover from the spot, but they have managed to come up with everything else that was intact on the spot. After checking the things out, they end up getting to know the protagonist's name, and the protector finally introduces himself as Enfield Gray, and they all begin to eat, assuming that they will have some time to talk about each other when that is done. In the middle of the conversation, Gray asks if the protagonist has been eating shellfish in his world. He brings up a lot of them when he says yes, and the look on the fish makes the protagonist feel like he is about to throw up, let alone eat them. After getting to know more about Gray, the protagonist now knows that the Lemurian company means that he must not be from Sarka's country in the first place. To explain the situation more, Gray claims that he was dispatched to the country of Sarka as a soldier for a colonial management company, as he is originally from the country in the west called Albion. But after sprawling into some events, Gray managed to get engaged with Sarka's sister, and this time the protagonist realizes why she has been calling him her brother this whole time. After seeing that the protagonist has been wearing his jacket this whole time, he thinks of returning to him, but he assumes that the protagonist will be better with that instead of wearing nothing. Gray adds that he will be heading to the Lemurian Company trading station in the south of Datra, and he will try his best to keep them safe until they get in there. Just when Gray thinks of offering some weapons to the protagonist, he begins acting negative all over once again, and it somehow irritates him knowing that it will only make him fall into depression, and the trouble will keep on pressing against him. But knowing that he has already managed to think of giving away his life to protect Sarka, he should be acting for all that right now, which will mean some sense of pride. But in the end, Gray looks rather happy that he decided to keep living after all, and the protagonist feels like he will finally manage to make something of himself after being neglected these previous years of his life. At the Datra Kingdom of Dala, the Governor-General of Datra named Bread Regan looks rather desperate and angry knowing that Grey Enfield is the one who has been going against them this whole time. But he doesn't seem to care how many people end up dying and how much armory they will have to waste. He thinks of retrieving the ambrosia their best. He also claims that his men can finish off the others if they want to, only to make sure that they have the power of ambrosia in their hands. When the army of Dala gets into the dyeing factory, the situation and the smell make them feel like they are about to vomit as soon as possible, and they notice that the factory's poison and waste get mixed with the sewer water, which is creating a rather disgusting situation to pollute the whole system. Just when the woman commander begins to shout around her saying that they have been looking for a ghoul by the name of Burgess, a rather disgusting-looking creature wakes up while eating some kind of flesh in its mouth, only to teleport behind her. Then, when the lady named Darkies warns her men to not move, the clever creature begins to add that his poison is even able to finish off the giants, meaning that she must be rather intelligent in this case. Knowing that they both know their grounds, the creature starts asking her to start speaking what she wants to say, and she claims that the Governor-General has some kind of request for him, as he has been finding someone to finish off a target, and he is willing to pay a lot more than what he regularly does, and the creature gets interested in listening to her after hearing about the cunning offer. Meanwhile, in the city of Surya, people can be busy in the markets trading with each other as much as possible, and Sarka and the protagonist can be seen walking through the marketplace only to realize that the market is rather packed. Grey claims that the port city is working as the center of commerce for the whole town, and the products are daily getting exported and sold here through various transportation, and the location dwelling in Sakura makes Grey explain that they eventually sell spices and rare metals most of the times, as the Adar is famous for its gold and orichalcum. Then when Sarka seems rather interested in gold, the protagonist thinks of how she will be looking after wearing a lot of good materials on her body, and she calls him a pervert once again for thinking about her body. Then when he is unable to realize why she has been acting like this, Grey assumes that she must be mad at him for what he had done in the morning, and Grey suggests that he shouldn't be too hard on him or Sarka, as she is getting better than how she has been before in the beginning. Now that the protagonist thinks of what she said about her parents being murdered in front of her makes the protagonist realize that she has the right to act like this, and it is rather normal for someone having a rough life. This means that he cannot even imagine how she has been feeling this time, and the reasons of Datra attacking Adar becomes clear to the protagonist the more he thinks of what they have in the city. Even though the protagonist used to think that a fantasy world didn't have problems like what they had in the real one, the protagonist now knows that it is rather similar to the real world, and he has been thinking about it the wrong way. Soon enough, he notices that a bunch of girls are being chained and being carried by a group of people, and Grey claims that they are all slaves, and according to him, the advanced nations have already started to abolish slavery for their own reasons. But knowing that most of the countries are falling back, it is rather problematic to reduce or get rid of the slavery situation, no matter how hard they continue to try. When one of the slaves begins to escape in the market, people start shouting to catch the slave, and she gets knocked down by a reptile-looking guy who he uses his tail to make her fall down on the ground. Then when the master comes in, he thanks the man and starts beating the hell out of the girl for trying to escape, adding that she must know her own place. Then when they notice that the protagonist and the others are looking right at them, he begins asking them if they will be interested in buying the slave, as the brothels will be uninterested in buying one like her. Then, when the girl begins to speak, the reptile dude claims that she has been lying to them this whole time, and she claims that she was never born to be a slave as she was picked from the gutter, but she has skills because of being trained. When the dude begins to bid on her, he claims that he will have to check her out in the beginning if he wants to buy her, and the slave trader agrees that he will be allowed to check her out and removes her clothing. Then when she claims that she will not be showing anymore, they warn her once again, and she is forced to do so as they were demanding to finish her off if she was thinking of doing otherwise. At this moment, Sarka comes in saying that she will be the one to buy the girl, and starts removing her jewelry in front of the men. Even though Grey insists that she has to stop it, she claims that she cannot turn back from the girl if she is from Adar. When Grey begins to explain that they will need the funding, the trader insists that the girl is rather expensive to cash out more money from her, and the guy begins to get out with the jewelry when Grey begins to press down on his throat. When the girl is finally freed, Sarka begins asking her how she is feeling and bringing up the fact of being the maid at the court of Adar. Sarka is interested in knowing if she has been speaking the truth, as she has been looking for Princess Kasha. But the more she keeps on pressing her about it, she claims that she doesn't want to answer her questions while crying out loud, adding that she has been lying to keep herself safe. Then, when Sarka realizes that she must have done it on a whim, she feels like, because of being proud, the Adari people do not want to work as slaves, which is why she had to do it in the first place. Seeing that Sarka is not mad at her makes the girl to feel like she is in a dream, and she adds that she will be free from now on, and the protagonist begins to empathize the princess to make her realize that it will be okay. But Gray becomes hard on her for acting like that, as the priceless item handed to the man will keep them in trouble if someone finds out, as if she is not trying to take the situation carefully at all. Realizing that she has done something rather insane, she begins apologizing to Gray for being useless in such a crucial point of her life and asks him to forgive her. Gray insists that they need to keep on moving, and Sarka runs away, adding that she will need some moments to be alone. When a car comes in the middle, she vanishes out of nowhere, and Gray insists the protagonist that they will have to find her, and the protagonist keeps on arguing about having the morality to help someone in the streets. Knowing that they cannot keep on bickering about it, Gray insists that they will have to move on, and the same slave girl from before begins to think that she will have to run away so she is never caught again in her whole life. On the other hand, when the protagonist keeps on helping out old people in the streets, Sarka begins spending her time in front of a waterway to remember the past that she had with her family. At that moment, Gray ends up reaching Sarka, and the protagonist keeps on handling the old woman behind his back as she claims that she wants to reach her grandson who has been working nearby. Just when Gray feels like something must be wrong, the old man reveals the real face, and this person is none other than the Corpse Eater, and one of his arrows end up hitting Gray in the shoulder. As soon as the ghoul reveals its face, Gray recognizes it, and the ghoul adds that he is too late to survive. When the ghoul keeps targeting the protagonist, Gray shouts at the protagonist, saying that all he has to do is worry about Sarka, and shoots in the direction of the ghoul to keep them safe. Then, when Gray claims that he will have to stay and fight, the split personality of Shakuntala comes up claiming that Sarka and the protagonist are both still unable to understand their roles and capabilities. When the impending danger keeps rushing over the protagonist, he begins to bow down on the ground, and she demands he should stand up to raise his eyes to fight with the enemy in front of him to accept the art of the world for one reason only. Then, when Gray is beginning to feel the poison entering his core, the protagonist claims that he will do his best to protect her. The idea of Sarka's nectar keeps on banging inside the protagonist's head, and he feels like he must be in some kind of illusion where she is claiming that she can see the shine in his eyes that is asking her to please him. Instead of waiting for some more time, she ends up holding him inside to make him feel the wave of the nectar's unleashing powers to change the flow of the situation right now. As soon as the taste gets the touch of his mouth, his body fulfills the criteria of morphism once again, and the heartbeat of the ghoul keeps banging in his ears as if he is really close to him. When the lightning power starts crashing down on the ground, it feels like the hell is really about to clash down on the ground, and the scream made by the protagonist keeps on filling every corner of the city. Instead of waiting to get fought back, the ghoul starts attacking the protagonist head-on, and the protagonist ends up creating a huge wave of lightning in front of him, which makes it impossible for the arrows to pass and hit him. The ghoul realizes that beating the protagonist wouldn't be as easy as he thought it would be, and the protagonist whooshes like a flash in front of the monster to release a heavy hit on its hands. As soon as the punch clashes against its hands, his hands start to burn as if something hot is leaping against his arms over and over again. When the monster begins to run from the protagonist, he keeps on chasing him through the roofs, and the pawns of the government official keeps on chasing them down from the streets to look over their fight to report to their superiors. Even though the army commanders look rather unwell about the situation, the female soldier claims that Burgess will be fine as he can change his shape anytime he wants, which will let him have some advantages. It seems that he has some kind of heavy hitting experience that one will take even hours to find someone like him in the crowd, which makes him the best killer in the market that one can find to complete their goal. But when the protagonist comes down on the ground, it starts arching its back, and the back starts to grow a lot of tentacle-like spikes, which makes her unable to grasp what it is targeting in the first place. Instead of focusing on one target, the protagonist releases countless spears around him to exterminate the monster, and when the female soldier feels like there is no way he would be able to manage to get to him like that, she feels like the whole market of people will be massacred in a second if he gets them like that. Instead of targeting everyone in the market, the spikes begin to mix into the crowd to chase down only one person in the middle, and the spikes begin to flash before attaching to him. Just when the ghoul is officially found out by the protagonist, the spikes begin to tear through the monster to make the public notice what is even happening in the first place. After being hit like that by the protagonist, the ghoul begins to slide into one of the corners of the city to heal himself. But the protagonist comes out of nowhere to punch the heck out of him and immediately tears through his face to make him look unimaginable. When the deal is done, the ghoul can be seen obliterated on the ground, and the face is rather split from the middle, and even the soldiers from the government are unable to believe that it was manageable by the protagonist. As soon as the protagonist rushes off from the corner area, they assume that the protagonist will be heading to the princess right now instead of wasting his time. In this current time, the princess is unable to realize what she can to do get Gray better, and he claims that she doesn't have to thank someone like him for what he has done. As soon as the protagonist comes back in front of them, Gray knows that he has managed to exterminate the monster, and Gray begins to reveal his feelings in front of her, knowing that he is about to die soon enough. Even though Gray knows that she is rather kind, he wants her to know that people are about to take the advantage of her kindness, making the kindness feel like some kind of luxury in this cruel world. Then Gray speaks for the both of them, saying that they will have to be careful from now on, and trusting in everyone will get them into trouble, and lets them know that if they manage to take them where they want to take them, they will never come out alive out of that place. Gray asks both of them to get stronger as soon as possible to get better in front of the enemies, and the protagonist promises that they will do what he says. Knowing that they will keep on listening to his words, Gray's soul leaves his body in the end. Then the same woman commander from before comes in, adding that Gray used to be a brave man, and the princess instantly realizes that they must be from the Delani officials. As soon as she claims that they are her prisoners from now on, the protagonist tries his best to get her away from the woman, but the protagonist ends up slamming down on the ground almost instantly. It seems that he has lost too much of his powers after transforming into a powerful being, and seeing that he is currently at such a disadvantage, the woman thinks of slashing his neck down the line to make sure that he is not about to create any problematic situation for them. Then, when the danger is about to snatch his life, a leopard comes out of nowhere hanging onto the protagonist's clothing, and the woman realizes that the creature has to be a Cillianthrope. She commands her people to fire at the monster as much as they can, and the leopard manages to carry the protagonist as far away as it can. It seems that the leopard creature is no one but the slave girl that the princess rescued before. Then, when the protagonist is in his sleep, he sees that Sarka has been talking with someone, and in the end, she offers him to drink the nectar to make him the same powerful being, which ends up feeling like a terrifying thing to imagine for the protagonist. After seeing something like that, the protagonist ends up waking up from his sleep, and he notices that the same girl named Nia is sitting on his bed. After noticing that he has woken up, the protagonist gets served some food by her, and she makes the food for him after finding some fish, and the protagonist feels like she made it rather tasty. She begins to relay him the news of what has happened when he went unconscious, and she claims that they might have taken her to the Delani Imperial Fortress in the city of Surya. Even though the place is not that far, she knows that the soldiers have been moving into it for a while, and she thinks that while they keep busy themselves transferring them, they will manage to surprise them in the meantime. Now knowing that Sarka is nowhere beside him, the protagonist begins to wonder why someone like him chose to work for the princess, and he feels like he has no answer for his own question right now. But all he knows is that he made a promise to a friend, and he will have to become stronger to fulfill that dream. He instantly asks Nina to show him the fortress as soon as possible. He lets her know that he has made a promise to save the princess, and she feels like the Delani soldiers are rather pretty, but he is focused on the task at hand, so he will have to move on as soon as possible. He even starts begging her, but she feels like there is no value in helping someone like him as she barely knows him. But she ends up accepting the favor to help him out, knowing that she will manage to help out Sarka in the process, and the protagonist asks her to let him know about the current affairs of the world and how the technology works here. The protagonist promises himself that he will start learning, and he will stop running from his fear because he is already running out of time. and he will have to survive in this world by learning how to fight properly. Then some days later in the Delani Imperial stronghold in Syria, everyone looks rather cautious, and they seem rather serious about the mission to protect the stronghold to keep the protection in one place. The stronghold and the people look rather heavy-hitting and enjoying their time in the middle of the canteen-like place they have in there. When everyone else is enjoying, the commander comes in to remind them that they have to get ready for the next day's engagement, so there shouldn't be any kind of mistake. After a while, one soldier comes in getting his hands on Nina, claiming that she has been sneaking around the whole place this time around. Then when she is caught, the protagonist comes out dressed up as Gray Enfield, claiming that he is Gray, and as soon as the introduction is done, he is obeyed almost instantly, knowing that he is the highest positioned commander in the whole stronghold. The stories say that the legend of Gray Enfield began in Syria with a battle in the first place, which almost matches up with the events that are happening currently. On the other hand, in the torture cell that is keeping Sarka away from the protagonist can be seen being guarded by a fat man, and the man keeps on demanding her to reveal the ambrosia in front of him, which he has been hearing so much about. The man claims that he admires her resolve, but he thinks that being stubborn will get her nowhere, and the more she thinks about Gray, the more she keeps feeling worse from here, knowing that he wouldn't be the one to come out to save her from the trouble anymore. Then when she thinks about the protagonist, she hopes that he is far away from this kind of trouble, as she must have only done worse by summoning him in here to get him into serious problematic situations. Then when the protagonist stands in front of all the soldiers, they are all spooked out, and the protagonist begins to feel that they must already feel some kind of suspiciousness around him. Now that he is really betting everything in this place, it starts getting him rather nervous, and he keeps on praying that it will work out as soon as possible. Looking back in the past, Nina and the protagonist have been planning everything from the beginning, and she helped him to understand the port city map of Syria. After checking out the map of the neighboring cities, the protagonist felt like the conflict between them began in the earnest when the Republic of Dala invaded Adar. But when Albion came into this situation, they have started developing relationships with Adar to declare war against Dala. Now that the picture of Gray comes into the play, Nina claims that he has to be part of Albion's army to begin with, and then the protagonist feels like Gray has been talking about some kind of colonial management. Just when the idea of East India Company comes into play, the old memories from his past life begin to rush through the protagonist's mind, and when Nia feels like he has been acting weird for a while, the protagonist claims that he wants to know more about it. When the protagonist starts feeling some kind of interest in the map of the world, she explains the subcontinent of Mara, and the more he thinks about it, he feels like they have been depicting the same scenario as the history of his own world in the later part of the 19th century. But this world is filled with magic, monsters, and various races instead of being filled with humans, and now in the present time, the female commander feels like she must have heard of Gray at some point in his life, but she is unable to recall. Even though the uniform looks rather explaining to her, she is unable to realize why he has been wearing a mask this whole time, and she remembers that he ended up going missing when Adar was attacked. Realizing that she is buying his story, he adds that after the battle, his face ended up sustaining a lot of damage, and now he has to wear a mask to hide the injuries, and he feels like he can still have the image back to get the attack running at the enemies. Then he begins saying that he is in here to protect the princess by getting her back, letting the whole army know that they have to set her free as soon as possible. It seems that the protagonist even managed to scout the fortress that has been carrying the princess, and the more he looks like the Lemurian soldiers acting all out around the fortress, he senses that they might be here to attack the fortress, and that was when he initially thought of playing the dead guy wearing a mask and everything else along the line. Knowing that this is the last chance he will have in his grasp, the protagonist claims that he will do what he has to do to save Sarka, but Nina insists that the whole thing would be rather crazy, and even though if he manages to fool them all, they will initially kill him soon enough after finding out that he has not been acting honestly. But the protagonist feels like he will see when it comes to that, as he now will have to think of saving her, and he doesn't care what comes after that at all. Then in the present, when the protagonist relays the proposition to the female commander, the companion of hers feels like there is no way she should buy his information like this, as he is rather suspicious. But she asks him to behave correctly and stay within his limits, and the protagonist decides to ask the man his name only to make him nervous. Soon enough, the other soldiers claim that the reinforcements are approaching the fortress, and the protagonist claims that he will be the one to deal with them. which makes Eren accept the fact that the protagonist seriously has the balls to say something like that. Just when the commander thinks of checking out what is actually happening this time about the reinforcements, she feels like she is about to lose her mind, and the protagonist claims that they will move on to the overhang and use the dynamite. Even though the commander is unable to realize what the protagonist is handling with him, he introduces the theory of dynamite in front of her, and the fact that he has it on him is because Nina took him to the alchemy shop to check the weapons out. Then when he reached the shop, he felt like he had been seeing a dream in front of him, as the alchemist looked rather young to him. Nina claims that the reason behind this is that she is a halfling, and the protagonist began saying that he was in need of some kind of weapon, but she instantly started apologizing to him as there are some sort of restrictions on the delivery of weapons. When the protagonist claimed that he would be fine with anything that she ended up producing, she started working almost instantly, and after tasting the flavor of the material. While talking with her, she claims that he must be the one who set off like a bomb in the marketplace, and the protagonist is unable to imagine how she managed to capture his face inside of her mind in his morphed state. About making an exchange, she claimed that he would have to allow her to check out his Durrani god spell once again, and answer all of her questions about the place he came from, and the protagonist got to know her name in the end. As soon as they made up a deal, she started clinging on to him as if she was the happiest person in the world, and she made him realize that there was no way that he would end up going out of his deal in any way. After planting the bomb at the correct spot, the protagonist sets off the bombs by lighting them up at once and starts waiting in the corner to make sure that everything is going as well as they thought it would be. When the bang happens, the enemy soldiers are unable to wonder what is happening, as if the sky itself is crashing down on them at once, and the allies, including the commander, claim that she has never seen this kind of explosion happening in her whole life. The idea of the powder is rather alien to her, and the protagonist promises that he will allow her to learn it the correct way, which will help able to secure her future goal. It seems that the theory of Alfred Nobel worked really well for the protagonist, and when he explained how the explosion would have to be for them, Celia began working on the caps that he made for the explosion to be like. Then when she asks about the Academy failing to do something like that, he begins to keep the utmost secrecy of what he has done to make it like this, while he learned this whole thing in his job of working as a construction worker. Knowing that they have more dynamites left in his grasp, he claims that they will be able to use them the next day while hunting for the enemies inside of the fortress. After hearing the words out of his mouth, the commander and the others get really hopeful, knowing that maybe this time will be their good luck charm, and she dreams of getting ahead of all the competitions. In the meantime, when the commander drops in to have a bath, all the perverts of the army begin to check her out, claiming that they will soon go on to leave, and it seems that they have been planning something rather sinister before leaving the fortress. But when something insane is about to happen, the protagonist comes in the middle, warning them that they will soon face the firing squad if that happens. As soon as he remarks that the scores with them will be settled once the deal is done with the enemies, they begin running away, fearing for their own lives, knowing that Gray is a scary one. Then, while leaving the clothes to the commander, he claims that Nia was the one who saw the men leaving the camp, and the protagonist claims that they will have to move at dawn, so she has to sleep lightly. Then, when he thinks of heading inside, the companion of the commander claims that the men will surely run off into the middle of the night, and the protagonist thinks that it will be better for them as the bad apples will only ruin the whole basket. Knowing that the protagonist is the one who protected the commander, he thanks the protagonist for doing what he has done, and the man claims that the protagonist has finally earned his trust, and the protagonist feels like he will finally make it to reach Sarka as he is finally on his own way. At the Delani Governor General's place, the news of his whole reinforcement getting wiped out gets released, and he is surprised to realize that his whole crew is gone in one strike. Even though some details are yet to uncover how that ended up happening, they feel like it must have been some kind of ambush managed by the enemies, as there is no way someone may have caused that to happen. The governor thinks that it must have been done by some kind of cannon to begin with, and the woman commander thinks that the Duke would definitely want something like that to happen to reclaim the Adari Ambrosia. Now that she knows that it has happened, she feels like she should not have given up on the princess when the leopard came in to take the protagonist away from her grasp. Even though she wanted everyone to chase down the leopard, the army came in from the territory of Duke Gazuro asking her if they had permission to operate in their area, which was rather unreal and coincidental. The fat man who is the higher up of the army came in claiming that Regan may be the governor general, but he claimed there was no way he would have permission to disturb the peace of the borer like that whenever he wanted. After finding the princess in his own grasp, the Duke ordered her to leave the princess in his grasp, saying that she would be in his care from now on, and she decided to leave her knowing that they didn't have any kind of power to go against him for the time being. She now realizes that the Duke knew everything from the beginning, and the general begins asking her if she has heard that for all his noble lineage, he is being called the pig for some obvious reasons, as he is rather clever than everyone else for his clever strategies. While she is unable to wonder what she must be doing right now, the general claims that his plans of getting the princess back are not changing for the time being, and she thinks that he must have been able to see that something like this was about to happen from the get-go. He hopes that he could guess it would have happened, but he also knows that the princess will be with them when the time comes and orders the commander to act how he guided her to do so in the first place. Meanwhile, the pig can be meeting with some interracial women, and just when the Duke comes in front of them, he begins to whip the shit out of each one of them, adding that a real lady of the Grand City would never laugh like that in front of someone like him. Despite the women begging for their lives, the Duke keeps on stomping them all at once, claiming that they are nothing more than some simple country girls. Even after his man comes in to warn him, he claims that he doesn't give a damn about what happens to them as he is above it all. The Duke feels like it must be some kind of dismissal that he is staying away from his own land, living with the savages for some valueless reason, and he seems rather devastated that despite living in the age of science, the frontier is weaker than ever. The guy claims that the option might be rather suitable for the time being, as he should be the one to focus on the ambrosia, adding that when it is confirmed that the girl has been carrying the potential, he will be returned to his homeland as soon as possible. Now that he thinks of it, even though the princess keeps on disobeying him, he thinks that he will be able to bring out the ambrosia within her, and he feels like she is holding out for the same person for no reason as he is dead in the first place. Now that she has been wasting his time this whole time, he feels like he will have to use the external force to gush out her real self this time around by using his whip on her like he did on the women who came to meet him. Then when the protagonist comes in with the army that he was guiding, they realize that the number of soldiers guarding the fortress has increased since the last time, as if they were assuming something will happen. Meaning that if they make one single mistake as moving their noses, the soldiers will come at them like bees to make sure that none of them are alive. But the protagonist assures that the number wouldn't be the issue they have to look for right now, and starts reporting to the first group, which has been waiting for their command. When the first group is near the mountain peak, the second group positions themselves behind the rocks, and even the female commander in their group looks like everything seems to be in position, which is later verified by the protagonist himself. As they begin to look into the positioning of their group, the soldier companion of the commander adds that he has never taken part in anything even remotely like what they are about to do right now, and the protagonist resolves his determination, claiming that this situation will work out with full confidence. He assures them that as he has said that they will manage till the end, they will have to believe in him, and the whole army of soldiers begin to feel like they are about to change the fate of their placement, this time for sure with the help of Gray. Even though the protagonist himself claims that he will make it happen, he himself is full of worry, and he thinks that he will have to be successful till the end without thinking otherwise. He believes that everyone will be risking their lives because of his command, so the least he can do for them is resolve their fear, knowing that they must be fearless, standing against the enemies at once when the time comes. This scenario reminds him of the past. Working in the advertising company as a clerk, his boss would always berate him, claiming that he would have to put more fire into his work, and no matter what kind the product was, the boss believed that the command was the only thing to shape someone's future. But he was always lacking the confidence in him, so no matter how the product is, the customers end up chasing it till the end. Even though he now knows that the guy has been spewing nothing but lies, he brought out the honesty of the society, so the people are hoarding like bees to clean out the shit that you keep on selling. Just like that, to fight for the lives of the soldiers who believed in them, the first group began the operation by throwing the dynamite toward the corridor of the fortresses by exploding each one of them to make it unable to take notes. As soon as the corridors begin to blast away, the soldiers feel like they are being shelled right now, and even the Duke gets nervous about what is about to happen to them as they are already under fire. As the first task is now done, the protagonist reminds himself of what he planned from the beginning, and he thinks of splitting their groups into 3 formations. While one of them started taking care of the east, others would be to the south near the bridge, and another would be taking care of the west on the opposite side of the shore at once. The idea of them all splitting at once felt rather dangerous to everyone, knowing that staying together would boost confidence, and when they thought of breaching the walls, the protagonist knew that it was not about to be enough to blow them at once by using the explosives. But depending on the psychological situation of the guards, the protagonist made sure that they would think of being shelled on by a cannon, which is why they came up with the mission of throwing them near the walls to make them believe some kind of siege is happening. Now that the situation has worked out, the guards are said to hold the east side of the fortress to quiet the cannon, and it seems that the Duke and his guards finally took their bait as they wanted. Knowing that the western side is all unguarded, the protagonist knows that they will have to move in rather quickly to engage. Even though while planning it seemed like some kind of blind spot had been overlooked, the protagonist made sure that nothing would be left out, as the two sides will only be some distractions while something else will be happening in the meantime. Now that the situation has been changed by making the attack from the west side, the Duke feels like he is the cleverest one in the world and thinks of forming the whole group to the west side, and commands all of the enemies to slaughter at once. When everyone has already moved out, the gate is only being guarded by 2 soldiers, and Nina thinks of going in by taking off her clothing and transforming into a leopard once again. When the time comes, the protagonist feels like he needs to thank her for risking her life for the siege, and he promises that he will be counting on her. As soon as she has been noticed by the soldiers, she begins to charge at them while carrying a dynamite in her mouth, and the female commander claims that Nia must be of pure blood to have the ability to transform in a second. Just when the soldiers drop down from the attack made by Nia, she opens the gate, and everyone starts charging inside at once as fast as they can. It seems that they have not been making any kind of mistake, and the protagonist promises that once they end up reaching the princess, he will be the one to handle the rest, and he keeps on promising that he will have something bigger than that. When the fight ensues, the female commander comes into the middle to slash down the enemy that was trying to strike the protagonist down, and she can't think of getting him wounded, knowing that he is the last hope of their winning. Nia begins to guide the protagonist, sensing that she can find out the smell where it has been coming from, and the princess begins to wonder what has been happening outside at this time. Soon enough, the protagonist makes in front of the prison cell that was keeping her locked, and the protagonist apologizes to her for being late to save her. Even though she begins to sob after seeing him, unable to realize why he has been trying this hard to get back to her, she regains her consciousness as Shakuntala. Instead of waiting for it, she asks him to undress her, adding that it is already time to taste her nectar once again, and as soon as he obeys her order, the flow of power begins to enlighten the whole room.